alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers and sisters in Islam. Welcome to a new episode of our program, The Pool of Ideas, exclusively right here on Huda TV with Dr. Mahmoud Khalifa. In this very special episode, inshallah, we will begin talking about a new ideology that exists in the world that we live in today. From the sound of it, it sounds like it is a modern type of ideology, but we'll find out about it with the doctor in just a moment, inshallah. In this episode and also in the next episode, we'll be talking about postmodernism. Postmodernism. Doctor, if we can begin by defining this concept, I'm guessing it has something to do with modernity in one way or another because it's called postmodernism. Your thoughts?
Actually, it is very hard to define postmodernism because it's a collection of ideas rather than a straightforward ideology. Postmodernism is more about what it denies than what it affirms. So postmodernism could be simply defined as a way of looking at the world that mistrusts all grand narratives, all philosophical schools of all grand narratives, all ideologies that try to organize man's existence on earth. For example, postmodernism would consider Islam as a grand narrative. A grand narrative here is not a good idea.
What is a grand narrative?
A grand narrative is like an ideology that tells you about the purpose of man on earth, that claims to organize man's activities, political, social, and it gives him guidance in many fields, interprets the world for him. So a grand narrative is a way of looking at the world, of organizing the world, of giving it a purpose. So Islam, for example, is a totalitarian idea because it exhausts the social and political phenomenon by giving guidance in all fields of life. So Jean-François Lyotard in his book La Condition Postmoderne, or the postmodern condition, is very skeptical about all claims to grand narratives, narratives that somehow gives a progressive view of the universe, a progressive movement from in the universe, or gives a guidance or an interpretation of the universe. So,
just so we can put it into context, around what year was this book published?
Around the late 70s. It was
1970s.
Yeah. So, and this comes as at the heart of this ideology of postmodernism. There lies an irrationalism, and I would call it the irrationalism of postmodernism is a loss of balance in Western civilization, because it comes right after the post, which means after modernism. This post comes after a modernism where the Western mind was sure about its purpose, where there was an ideology of progress, that the more the human mind works on things, the more it achieves solutions, the more it progresses. And and at the heart of modernism there was rationalism, which came as a result of the Enlightenment and the deification of reason as a source of all that is good.
Mm-hmm.
So postmodernism unraveled all this by doubting even the thinking being or the thinking reason, the autonomous self. There is no longer autonomous persons who exist and think. We have people, or we have subjects which are more or less affected by the powers, economic and political, that are around them. So man is not essentially in possession of himself in postmodernism. So postmodernism has unraveled the knot, untied the knot which was done by by modernism, which hinged more or less on rationalism.
If we talk a little bit about the history, you said the book that you mentioned was written in the 1970s. Is this when postmodernism all began, or did it begin before this time frame?
Actually, it begins before that in the ideology of the existentialist school, which looked at the universe in a very pessimistic way, and which basically said that man is not born with any essential qualities, but man creates his own destiny. That was very pessimistic. That paved the way for doubting man and the achievement of civilization.
And this is how they came to the idea that we can't really be sure of anything. Basically, that's the underlying premise of this ideology.
Yeah, one of the main assumptions of postmodernism is that of doubting. There is an excessive doubting in postmodernism. Everything, even meaning. When you read a novel, you can reach hundreds of possible interpretations. When you read a text, you're uncertain about many things. And you have even a theory of death of the author. You can't even go back to the author to ask questions about the text. To the extent that all readings of a particular text are misreadings. So there is no definite thing about meaning. Meaning is always in a state of influx. There is no particular certainty. You don't have something to hold in your hand, grasp. It is all a continuous circle of doubt,
Nothing is
uncertainty.
absolute.
Yeah, you are living in a complete relative world, which basically offers you no certainty. Not certainly anything to do with faith in God.
Exactly. This is leading me to the point that postmodernism, let's say, for example, when it comes to interpreting a novel, as you mentioned, wouldn't be really that big of a problem, because if I can interpret, with the author of a specific article or a specific novel or a specific movie or whatever the case may be, if I interpret it one way and if you interpret it another way, that's okay. But the problem with postmodernism really comes when it comes to the deen, when it comes to religion, right? Because if nothing is for sure, then who says that the Quran, for example, was revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And who says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists? Right? This is what postmodernists would say. They doubt everything. They doubt the existence of God. They doubt revelation. They doubt Islamic history. And of course, everything else.
Exactly. And that's why in Islam, one good thing about Islam or about is that there is God. And God seems to be the only sure basis on which meaning can be based. Without God, a universe has no point of reference. You go back to man. Man becomes your own reference. Man becomes the measure of all things. Man becomes the measure of values. And because we as humans, we differ. One person is different from another. We will have different hundreds of values, hundreds of ideas about what is good and evil. And let's go back a little bit. You asked a question before about the origins of postmodernism.
Yes.
Actually, postmodernism started fairly earlier than the 1970s. It goes back to the time of Friedrich Nietzsche in the late 19th century, when he declared that God is dead. The death of God was not about a physical death of God. It was about the death of meaning or any reference point outside the world of humans. So if there is no outside point of reference, you can't fix meaning. Meaning becomes relative. People can create and destroy meaning at their will and for their own purposes. So basically, believing in God or the reference point of God is very important to fix meaning. Otherwise, you live in a postmodern world where everything is in a continued state of influx. You can't fix or stop meaning or give a particular meaning to anything. You essentially live in a meaningless world where every day you can create a new meaning, a new story. All you can do is live in a small story of your own you create for yourself in order to continue life. Because postmodernism thinks that the best way for this world is for grand narratives to be destroyed or discredited. So postmodernism is not about creating meaning or certainty.
It's about
destroying meaning and certainty.
Yeah.
So in a postmodern world, all you have is a few stories here and there that explain small points in life. But you don't have an overall narrative, an overall point of view that would give purpose to an otherwise purposeless world.
As you said, a grand narrative. We'll take a short break, inshallah. My dear brothers and sisters, when we come back, we will go a little bit in depth about some of the principles of postmodernism. Obviously, we've said some of the main points of this ideology right here, but we'll go a little bit in depth and talk about some more principles of this ideology, inshallah. And don't ever forget that, inshallah, in the next episode, we will be talking about Islam versus postmodernism. We'll show the fallacies of this ideology and the greatness of Islam, inshallah. We'll be back in just a moment, so please stay with us. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back, my dear brothers and sisters, to the Pool of Ideas right here on Huda TV. We are continuing to talk about the ideology of postmodernism, and in this segment, inshallah, we will go beyond the definition and the history of this ideology. We've talked a bit about the principles that postmodernism came to promote. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these principles here in this segment, but in a different light. We will be comparing and contrasting Islam versus postmodernism. Dr. Mahmoud Khalifa, welcome back.
Thank you.
Let's begin by talking about the idea that there's nothing absolute in postmodernism. While if we compare that to Islam, we will see that there are certain things that are absolute. Postmodernism, if I understood correctly from your discussion, basically nothing is really answered. There is nothing absolute truth. But in Islam, there are absolute truths. Your thoughts?
Actually, postmodernism is a late development in Western thinking, which more or less, having failed to be connected to any order of ideas or order of belief systems that would determine meaning, the West is heading towards a complete madness or irrationality, because it continues to sort of lose grounding in any certainty. Islam offers certainty in a world of increasing uncertainty because it connects man to God. God is a fixer of meaning because you can always go back to the Quran as a foundational text. You can go back to the Sunnah as a foundational set of guidance, guiding ideas. So basically, Islam offers a Muslim two important things that would connect him to the world, connect him to a world of certainty, a balanced world, and they fix meaning, practice. They give general guidelines to everything. So basically, that guarantees fixing of meaning. Even all uncertainties can be tackled within the framework of the Quran and Sunnah. On the other hand, postmodernism destroys all sense of certainty, this undecidability of meaning. It rejects God. Postmodernism is essentially an atheistic philosophy because it doesn't only destroy the idea of a stable meaning. It destroys any quest for the world beyond the world we have here. So by getting rid of God, that is Nietzsche's death of God, postmodernism have opened the doors, have opened the doors wide for a relativism that would destroy any kind of certainty. And man cannot function in this world without some certain rules and objectives and purposes. Postmodernism is purposeless. It deconstructs ideas, deconstructs certainties, but never establishes any certainties instead to replace them. And thus postmodernism leaves man in a state of continued influx. There is no, because there is nothing to fix meaning. There is nothing to decide meaning. There is nothing to decide truth. There is no truth in postmodernism. Postmodernism looks at all truth and all ideas as just attempts at understanding meaning, attempts at creating a grand narrative. So
that was my next question, actually.
Yeah.
Grand narratives. Does Islam provide a grand narrative?
in the positive sense, it does, because a grand narrative would be a narrative that explains many things in the existence of man. For example, in the Quran, gives you the narrative of the origins of man in Adam in paradise. Then when Adam ate from the tree, then he came along with Hawa to earth, and then they started receiving messages from God, and they started. Adam was taught all the ideas or names of meaning, and started the earthly life of knowledge and understanding. Adam, without guidance from God, would have found it difficult to fix meaning. فَتَلَقَّى آدَمُ مِنْ رَبِّهِ كَلِمَاتٍ فَتَابَ عَلَيْهِ. So the words received by Adam from God are actually knowledge of this world. So who guaranteed or guarantees the fixing of knowledge, or what makes this knowledge relevant and certain? Because it's a knowledge that comes from the ultimate source of knowledge and certainty, that is God.
Yes.
So
That's why
Adam,
also in
as
Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He has taught Adam all
the names,
all the
names here was interpreted as all sources of knowledge in the world. So the problem here, or the main Islamic idea, is that Adam, the archetype of man, the father of all men and women, has already got a fixed meaning, a certainty. Adam, having left paradise, was left in an uncertain world and could not have made anything on earth out of his earthly life without receiving the words from God. So receiving the words from God it means that God fixes meaning, fixes certainties for Adam. So Adam on earth is not living out of his mind, out of his conjectures. Adam is living out of a particular privileged access to divine knowledge.
What else is a main principle in postmodernism that we can talk about and compare to Islam?
Actually, one postmodernism idea of man. Postmodernism doesn't think of man as an autonomous, having an autonomous will. Man is essentially somebody who is basically in a state of influx, psychological influx. You are today one person, the other day you're different. You keep changing all the time. You don't have a basic identity according to postmodernism.
And no basic principles at the same time.
And as such, you are not accountable in a way. In Islam, man from birth to death learns, but he retains some identity. And as such can be responsible for his actions.
So basically postmodernism is saying that human beings are totally the product of their surroundings or their environments. And they cannot be blamed for being whatever they are because it's not really in their hands. It's the society or the environment around them that shaped them. Am I correct?
Yeah, exactly. They're being molded by the political, economic forces, and they're just a site on which these different political powers or economic powers fight. So a man is just a subject of other forces, is subject to economic forces, is subject to political forces.
While Islam, on the other hand, we can say that no matter what environment you're in, you're still required to have a certain set of principles, a certain set of ideals, and to follow a certain set of laws. Obviously, it's different from society to society. If you're living in an Islamic land, it may be easier, and maybe as a state you're able to implement more of the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that doesn't exempt you from the basic principles of Islam if you're not living in an Islamic environment, correct?
Yes, right. So Islam gives you an individualism that is that would qualify you as an autonomous self to respond to challenges based on certain values that are taught to you by Islam. So Islam doesn't consider you a subject of other forces or an object on which other forces apply their leverage. It looks at man as an actant in the world, a Khalifa of God on earth. So man can mold the universe, not get molded. Man can shape nature to his benefit. Man can challenge politics, economics, and all these things.
And should not succumb to
so
the situation
he's not looked at as an object of dark forces or economic forces. He is an actant, he is active, and he can change the world using his own will.
Excellent. Are there any other main principles of postmodernism that we should be aware of?
Actually, the principle of relativism is the worst one because it gives rein to the idea that man is the measure of everything. So if everybody is the measure of morality, you'll have millions of moral codes. So by putting Islam at the heart of its, by putting man, by absolving man of any commitment to any grand narratives or any great ideas like great religions like Islam, it absolves him of all commitment to anything. So man is, because he's in a state of influx, there is no standing morality. He decides what is right and he decides what is wrong for himself. So adultery, there's nothing called adultery because the basic thing is enjoyment, pleasure-oriented society. So one of the ideas of postmodernism is somehow we are in a pleasure-oriented society, and as such, what satisfies man is right, what makes him lose pleasure is wrong.
Thank you so much, Doctor, for being with us, and this is definitely a very important topic, Islam and postmodernism. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, for the blessing of Islam, as always.
It's my pleasure.
Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair. My dear brothers and sisters, we hope that this episode was of benefit, inshallah. In the next episode of the Pool of Ideas, we will be talking about a new ideology and comparing it to the greatness and the perfection of Islam. Until then, take care of yourselves. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.